And I know Leon is away for the next few weeks. So today we're about to do the last chapter of the book of Joshua. So chapter 24. And then next week we'll continue with the book of Judges. So Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. I'm just going to mute all, and then if you know what to do if you have a question or a comment. So in our we're on page 143 in the Sonsino edition. Vaye'esof Yehoshua. So just to remind us, Joshua has gathered the people around him for a farewell address. That's last chapter, and he continues it in this chapter. And again, it continues the parallels the book of Joshua does with the Torah. There are lots of just as Moses is described as nearing the end of his life, so is Joshua. Just a lot of phrases, a lot of elements that are in Joshua that are reminiscent of the Torah. Vaye'esof Yehoshua et kol shiftei Yisrael shechema, vayikra leziknei Yisrael ula rashav, ula shoftav, ula shotrav, vayiyatzvu lifnei ha'elohim. Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel at Shechem, to Shechem, in Shechem. Just that hey ending just means that it's into, at Shechem. And he called to the elders of Israel and to their heads, the judges, the magistrates, and they stood before God. Or it says here, they presented themselves. Okay, they presented themselves, they stood before God in Shechem. So apparently the Mishkan is there in Shechem. And Shechem makes sense as a place to do this, and to have the Mishkan there, because it's centrally located in the land of Israel. So it is why. So in other words, if we're thinking about why Shechem here is this semi-capital city, or the place for the religious center of the people, it makes sense because it is geographically the center of Israel. 2. It also, by the way, could be related to what will come later in the book of Kings. After Solomon dies, the kingdom of Israel splits into two, and the northern kingdom sets up its capital there in Shechem. That there's like history there and precedent for having had the Mishkan there before, so that Solomon's son, who becomes the king of northern Israel, has precedent on his side when he wants to build an alternative temple there. Okay, someday we'll get to 1 Kings, and we'll be able to see that. Yes, Barry.
Does anybody posit the thought that Shechem also has a history that from Genesis, which is not so good, and that perhaps there was some sort of doomed quality to having something?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so there is that. Yes, what the revenge for the rape of Dinah happened in Shechem, but at the same time, it is territory that Jacob bought. So Abraham bought the burial plot, but Jacob bought land around Shechem. So if there's connection, yes, I think there's that. It goes both ways, that relationship with the city of Shechem, but I think more so it would be about this first actual territory being purchased as Israelite territory. Okay, verse 2. Vayomer Yehoshua el kol ha'am, ko amar Adonai Elohei Yisrael, be'ever hanahar yashvu avotechem me'olam, terach avi Avraham, va'avi Nachor, ve'ya'avdu Elohim acherim. Now, careful readers of the Haggadah might recognize this verse and the coming verses as one section that is part of the Magid section of the Haggadah. In other words, the more popular section is "My father was a wandering Aramean." It's from Deuteronomy 26, and there's a lot of midrash about that. But there's also, after that, all that midrash section, either after it or right before it, is this section from Joshua as an alternative of reminding us of our history. Okay, so let's just keep that in mind as we're reading this verse, these verses. So, verse 2, Joshua says to all the people, this is what God, the God of Israel, said. Quote, across the river, your ancestors dwelled for a long time. Your ancestors dwelt for a long time on the other side of the river. Terach, the father of Abraham, and the father of Nachor, and they worshipped other gods. Okay, so instead of my father was a wandering Aramean, here your ancestors were pagans. Before Abraham, their ancestors were pagans on the other side of the river. Which river? Not Tigris, Euphrates, don't know. 3, Va'ekach et avichem et Avraham me'ever hanahar, va'olech oto bechol eretz Canaan, va'arbe et zaro, ve'etain lo et Yitzchak. And I took your father Abraham from across the river, and I walked him, or I guided him, throughout the land of Canaan, and I made his descendants great, that is, in great number, and I gave him Isaac. 4, ve'etain leYitzchak et Yaakov, ve'et Esav, ve'etain leEsav et Har Seir, lareshet oto, veYaakov uvanav yardu Mitzrayim. And I gave to Isaac Jacob and Esau, and I gave to Esau Mount Seir to possess it, and Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt. Va'eshlach et Moshe v'et Aharon, va'egof et Mitzrayim, ka'asher asiti bekirbo, va'achar hotzeti etchem. And I sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt, or I sent plagues to Egypt, as I did in its midst. And afterward, I brought you out. Va'otzi et avotechem mimitzrayim, va'tavo'u hayama, va'yirdefu Mitzrayim acharei avotechem, berechev uvefarashim yam suf. And I took your fathers out of Egypt, and they came to the sea. And Egypt chased after your fathers with horses and chariots to Yam Suf, to the Reed Sea or the Red Sea. Vayitzaku el Adonai, vayasem ma'afel beinechem uvein hamitzrim, vayaveh alav et hayam, vayechasehu, vatir'ena einechem et asher asiti b'mitzrayim, vateshvu b'midbar yamim rabim. And they cried out to God, and I put a fog, or it says here a darkness, some kind of cloud, dark, foggy thing between you and between the Egyptians. And I brought on him, that is the Egyptians, the sea. So I didn't split the sea and then bring the sea. It's not saying that. I brought the sea on them, and it covered them, and your eyes saw what I did to Egypt, and they dwelled in the wilderness many days. Va'avi etchem el eretz ha'emori, hayoshev be'ever hayarden, vayilachamu itchem, ve'etein otam biyedchem, vatirshu et artsam, va'ashmidem mipnechem. And I brought you to the land of the Amorites, who were living across the Jordan, and they fought against you. They made war against you, and I gave you, and I gave them into your hands, and I gave them into your hands, and you possessed their land, and I destroyed them before you. Vayakom Balak ben Sipor melech Moav, vayilachem beYisrael, vayishlach vayikra leVil'am ben Beor lekalel etchem. And Balak the son of Tzipor, king of Moab, rose up and waged war against Israel, and he sent and called for Bilam ben Beor to curse you. Verse 10, Velo aviti lishmoa leVil'am, vayevarech baruch etchem, va'atzil etchem miyado. And I did not allow myself to listen to Bilam. In other words, this is recognizing that Bilam had some kind of power, and God was not swayed by Bilam's power to curse. And I blessed you and saved you from his hand. V'ta'avru et hayarden, v'tavo'u el Yericho, v'yilachamu v'chem ba'alei Yericho, ha'emori, v'haprizi, v'haknaani, v'hachiti, v'hagirgashi, hachivi, v'hayevusi, v'etein otam beyedchem. And you crossed the Jordan, and you came to Jericho, and the owners of Jericho, or the men of Jericho, waged war against you, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, and I gave them into your hands. Va'eshlach lifnechem et hatzirah, va'tegaresh otam mipnechem, shnei malchei ha'emori, lo becharbacha velo bekashtecha. And I sent before you the hornets, and they drove them out before you, to the two kings of the Amorites, not by your sword and not by your bow. Va'etein lachem eretz asher lo yagata ba, ve'arim asher lo venitem, ve'teshvu bahem kramim ve'zeitim asher lo netatem atem ochlim. And I gave you the land which you didn't work for, and cities that you did not build, and you dwelt in them, vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant, you are eating, or you're taking advantage of. You are uh, right, that you are consuming, right? So in other words, uh, the inhabitants are driven out, and lo and behold, the shells of everything is left behind that you could just go right in and take over, and you took over their vineyards and their olive groves. Yes, Barry.
Most of this is very familiar. Obviously, we
Yeah,
had
we
the
just
the
read
kind
it
of
in the book.
rewrap, but the Hornets part is
Right.
that was that in there before? I don't remember anything about Hornets.
So there
Is
was
that
some kind of plague that happened that made the conquest easier.
easier? Okay.
And so I just a second, I'm looking back to see where it could have been. Um, just
I mean, it's an interesting concept that hornets, bees,
yes,
stinging insects will.
right. I'm looking in chapter 9 where this could have happened. Just a second. Uh, um, uh, it just says that they were delivered into their hands. So just yeah, I I don't see it. Maybe Alter will say it, or the commentary below will remind us of this.
It's just that it's pretty dramatic, and you'd think that you'd
Yes,
remember that would
right. I know.
have a
Um, so we'll see. So let's just we'll keep this in mind. Okay, 14. Va'ata uh, y- uh, Yeru et Adonai.
Jonah,
Yes, Bess.
I'm sorry, I was too
Yeah.
slow with the. It says that you do not eat from the vineyards and olive yards. Not do you eat.
Uh,
End of 13.
I know, but I think it's translated wrong. You're dwelling in cities that you didn't build. You're taking advantage of vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. So because the Hebrew is lo netatem, you did not plant. Atem ochlim, you are eating.
Oh, okay, so this is
Okay.
wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So the altar translates it. Just a second.
Because it says, ye build not, ye planted not, yet ye eat.
Yes. Right.
It's like, it's written in weird English.
That's right. Which ye planted not, comma. Keep that. Do you eat? Yes. So it's not translated wrong. It's just translated old.
Punctually wrong.
Yeah.
But isn't this
No, it's
pretty
not
much-
punctually wrong. It's just old English.
No.
Yes,
But
Deb.
isn't this pretty
Yeah.
much what, Moses went through? I mean, we, in Deuteronomy, explaining.
Moses said this would happen, and now Joshua made it happen.
Okay.
Okay. 14. Vata yiru et Adonai ve'ivdu oto bitamim uve'emet. Vahasiru et Elohim asher avdu avotechem be'ever hanahar uve'mitzrayim ve'ivdu et Adonai. And now fear God and worship him bitamim uve'emet. So in truth, but the emet could also be loyalty. And tamim is in purity, in simplicity, or completely. So it's here it says sincerity. So I wouldn't have translated that way. It is wholly, WHOL, not HOLY. So it completely worship God, and and do away with or remove the gods with a small g that your fathers worshipped on the other side of the river and in Egypt, and worship God.
Which implies that they're still hanging on to the remnants of that, even after all of this. They're
Right. That's right. And the previous chapters to this one, Josh was encouraging them to get rid of those idols. 15. Ve'im ra be'enechem la'avod et Adonai. Bacharu lachem hayom et mi ta'avodun. Im et Elohim asher avdu avotechem asher be'ever hanahar. Ve'im et Elohei ha'emori asher atem yoshvim ba'artzam. Va'anochi uveiti na'avod et Adonai. And if it bodes ill of you to worship God, choose today who you will worship. The gods that your fathers worshipped on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites of which you are dwelling right now. And I, Joshua is saying, and my house will worship God. Vaya'an ha'am vayomer chalila lanu me'azov et Adonai la'avod Elohim acherim. And the nation answered in one voice. And I add that to this because the vaya'an is singular, as opposed to saying vaya'anu ha'am, so plural, right? So the people answered in one voice, Chalila lanu. So Chalila, so in modern Hebrew, chas v'chalila would mean God forbid. So far be it, it says in this English. So, but it's more than that. It's kind of a formulaic kind of oath taken. No way are we going to forsake God to worship other gods. 17, Ki Adonai Eloheinu hu hama'aleh otanu ve'et avotenu me'eretz Mitzrayim mi'beit avadim v'asher asa le'einenu et ha'otot ha'gedolot ha'ele v'yishmerenu b'chol haderech asher halachnu va u'v'chol ha'amim asher avarnu b'kirbam. Because God, our God, is the one who brought us up and our fathers from the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage, and did before our eyes all these great wonders, and guarded us on the whole way that we went, and among all the peoples that we went through in their midst. God was our shield, our protector. Right? 18, Vayegaresh Adonai et kol ha'amim v'et ha'emori yoshev ha'aretz mi panenu gam anachnu na'avod et Adonai ki hu Eloheinu. And God drove out all the people and the Amorites dwelling in the land from before us. So we too will worship God because he is our God. Vayomer Yehoshua el ha'am lo tuchlu la'avod et Adonai ki Elohim kedoshim hu el kanohu lo yisa lefish achem ulachatotechem. And Joshua said to the people, you are not able to serve God, because God is a holy God. He is a zealous God. Jealous here, jealous or zealous. He will not bear your transgressions and sins. 20, Ki ta'azvu et Adonai va'avadetem Elohei nechar v'shav v'heira lachem v'chila etchem acharei asher hetiv lachem. Lest you abandon God and worship other gods, and you return and to your evil ways. he will turn and make it bad for you and destroy you after he has done good for you. So in other words, be careful now. If you're agreeing to worship God, don't abandon, because God will make it bad for you and will destroy you. So he's prophesying about the exile to Assyria in the 700s and the exile to Babylonia in the 500s, which would be about 500 years ahead.
Jonah,
Yes.
I know that in the Tanakh there's often two telling the story back to back, and there's some scholars think that there was like a redactor that took two different versions, but you have this here too in Joshua. There's a he's telling the people what to do. The people say they're not going to do it. They're not going to forsake God, and then he tells them again, and then again they say they're not going to do it.
Right.
Is there any concept that these later books were also redacted, that there were also different versions of the same story that got put together?
I'm not
I mean, there's a
sure.
lot of repetition here.
Yes, but I'm not sure. I'm not up on the editors of Joshua and Judges and Samuel and all those books. I really don't know. And also the books of the prophets, I don't know about that. So I don't remember if Alter in his introduction to Joshua said anything about that, but we can look at that. But yes, I think it's the nature of biblical books to be repetitive. Okay, 21. Vayomer ha'am el Yehoshua lo ki et Adonai na'avod. The people said to Joshua, no, right, we will worship God. So in other words, the no meaning, don't worry. We affirm that we will not sin and go to other gods. Vayomer Yehoshua el ha'am edim atem bachem ki atem bachartem lachem et Adonai la'avod oto vayomru edim. Joshua said to the people, you are hereby witnesses to yourselves that you chose God to worship God. And they said, yes, we are witnesses. Or we hereby affirm this oath, or whatever, something like that. 23. Va'ata hasiru et Elohei hanechar asher bekir bechem v'hatu et levavechem el Adonai Elohei Yisrael. And now get rid of the strange gods that are in your midst, and turn your hearts to God, the God of Israel. Vayomru ha'am el Yehoshua et Adonai Eloheinu na'avod uvekolo nishma. And the people said to Joshua, God, our God, we will worship, and his voice we will obey. Vayichrot Yehoshua brit la'am bayom hahu vayasem lo chok umishpat bishchem. Joshua enacted a covenant with the people on that day, and it's set up as a statute and ordinance in Shechem. Vayichtov Yehoshua et hadvarim ha'ele besefer Torat Elohim vayikach even gedola vayekimeha sham tachat ha'ala asher b'mikdash Adonai. And Joshua wrote these things in the book of the Torah of God. Which book of Torah of God this is, we don't know, unless it's this book of Joshua, adding it to the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. And he took a great stone and he erected it there under the oak tree that was in God's sanctuary. Vayomer Yehoshua, I'm on 150 now, verse 27. Vayomer Yehoshua el kol ha'am, hine ha'even hazot tihiyeh banu le'edah, ki hi sham'a et kol imrei Adonai asher diber imanu, vahayata vachem le'edah, pen techachashun be'elohechem. And Joshua said to the people, here, this stone, this rock, will be for us a witness, a testimony, because it heard all the words of God that God spoke among us, and it will be for you a testimony lest you deny God. Vayeshalach Yehoshua et ha'am ish lenachalato. And Joshua sent the people to their inheritance, back home. He sent them back home. Vayehi acharei ha'devarim ha'ela, vayamat Yehoshua bin Nun eved Adonai ben me'ah ve'eser shanim. And after these things, Joshua the son of Nun died. Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of God, died at 110 years. Vayikberu oto bigvul nachalato betimnat serach asher bahar Ephraim mitzafon lahar Gaash. And they buried him at the boundary of his inheritance in Timnat Serach, which is on the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. So as opposed to not knowing where Moses is buried, here we're given specific directions or details as to where Joshua is buried.
Do we know where that is?
So we'll see in the commentary below.
Well, Timnah is a copper. They're copper mines.
No, this is
a different Timnah.
That's just plain Timnah. This
Okay.
is Timnat Serach, which is translated as Timnat Serach. So that's a town in the hill country of Ephraim in northern Israel. But so the commentary below and maybe Alter will give a more specific burial place. Vayavod Yisrael et Adonai kol yemei Yehoshua v'chol yemei hazakenim asher he'erichu yamim acharei Yehoshua v'asher yad'u et kol ma'asei Adonai asher asa liYisrael. And Israel worshipped God all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who lived a long time after Joshua, who knew all the works of God that he did for Israel. 32, Ve'et atzmot Yosef asher he'elu v'nei Yisrael mimitzrayim kavru v'shchem bechelkat hasadeh asher kana Yaakov me'et b'nei Chamor avi Shechem b'me'ah kesita vayiyu livnei Yosef lenachala. And the bones of Joseph that the people of Israel brought up out of Egypt, they buried in Shechem. Now in Exodus, we're told that Moses took Joseph's bones and carried them all through the wanderings in the desert. Okay, and then we don't hear about it until now at the end of the book of Joshua. So they buried these bones in Shechem, in the portion of the land, of the field that Jacob bought from the sons of Chamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 kesita, and it became for the children of Joseph an inheritance. Now, we supposedly know where Joseph's tomb is, because this is a place of great conflict today, because it's in the Palestinian territory. It's in the city of Nablus. And so the army goes to great efforts to protect Jews if they want to go to Joseph's tomb to pray or to study. So you always you hear every now and then about some conflict at Joseph's tomb. So we supposedly know where it is. I've never been there, but supposedly we know where it is. Ve'elazar ben Aharon mate vayikberu oto begiv'at Pinchas beno asher nitan lo bahar Ephraim. And Eleazar, the son of Aaron, died, and they buried him at the hill of Pinchas, his son, which was given to him in the mountain, the hills of Ephraim. Okay, so this is the end of the book of Joshua. So let's look at the commentary on this chapter, back to page 143, and then we'll look at Alter on it. Joshua's final address and death. So I'm reading from the newer one. Following the example of Moses, Joshua before his death solemnly addressed the people, reviewing their history and drawing the moral therefrom. They owed their preservation to God, and to him also was due their possession of their newly acquired land. Their future would be decided by whether they would remain loyal to his service or follow the worship of the deities of the peoples whom they dispossessed. To Shechem. The place was well chosen for the purpose, hallowed as it was by historical and religious associations. There, the promise concerning the land had been made for the first time to Abraham, the founder of the nation, and there he had built an altar, his first, to God. See Genesis 12. There, too, the people had heard the solemn pronouncement of the blessings and curses and had renewed their covenant with God. Right, so that's right. See chapter 8 in Joshua also. So, okay. Before God, Shechem was apparently the site of a temporary sanctuary. Beyond the river, so that, like I said, which river that is, we don't know, but it's saying the Euphrates in Ur of the Chaldees. So that is the Euphrates, that's Nahar. Nahar is river, Prat. So in Hebrew, it's Prat, and in English, it's Euphrates. And yeah, we're told that Abraham's family came from there. They served other gods. According to tradition, Terach was a manufacturer of idols, some of which Abraham broke. Right, so we have that midrash connected here too. Led him throughout all the land of Canaan to be possessed by his descendants. According to rabbinical tradition, by traveling through the land, Abraham took possession of it for posterity. Also, it's possible that Abraham was accepted as a ruler and a godly prince throughout the land. Right, so there's that idea too. That idea is in the commentary back on the Torah when it says in Genesis that Abraham walked the entire borders of the land of Canaan. The Midrash there says as a way to show that he's taking possession of the whole land. Mount Seir, better the mountain land of Seir. When Esau was given Mount Seir, he lost any claim to the land of Canaan. Went down into Egypt as the first act in the drama of which Israel's possession of the promised land was to be the denouement. Ye come, there were many who, like Joshua, had been present at the Exodus and the crossing of the Red Sea. They were over 60 or under 20 at the time, and so were not destined to perish in the wilderness. Right. In other words, we're told in the Torah that the generation of the Exodus died in the desert, and only Joshua and Caleb were left alive. But there were those who were under 20 when they left Egypt, and they apparently stayed alive too.
What did you say about over 60?
Yeah, so the only over 60 ones that stayed alive were Moses until he died before entering the land, and Joshua and Caleb. Aaron and Miriam died also. Yeah. Okay, 145. Your eyes saw. Strictly, this was true only of those who had been born in Egypt and had personally witnessed God's miraculous intervention on behalf of Israel. And only the children under 20 years at the time of the Exodus had survived the journey in the wilderness. It's interesting to note that in the Kuzari, a philosophical presentation of Judaism, written by Judah Halevi, he makes the Exodus the starting point of the Jewish faith and not any theological tenet, because while the latter was open to argument, the former was an indisputable historical fact witnessed by a large number of people. So the Kuzari, I read the Kuzari in a class a long time ago. It is a philosophical treatise. The premise for it's written as if it's a dialogue between a Jew who is Yehuda Halevi from Spain in around 1000 CE and the king of the Khazars, who are apparently this people who converted to Judaism, this legendary group of people that converted because of their conversation with Yehuda Halevi. You can Google Khazars conversion to Judaism. You can read about that whole story. Okay, it's just the only point here that the commentary is bringing is that here Joshua is pointing out the Exodus being witnessed by people, and that Yehuda Halevi uses that point to show that this is the starting point of the Jewish faith. Many days, 40 years, until the adults who left Egypt, with the exception of Joshua and Caleb, had died. The land of the Amorites, see on chapter 3. Here are the references to the land of Sichon and Og. Fought against Israel, see Numbers 22. The meaning of fought is opposed, since there is no record of a military attack by Balak, although such was his intention. The weapon he decided to use was Balaam's power to curse, as the verse goes on to relate. All right, so it could be a different tradition here. Joshua could be referring to a different tradition that has an actual battle with the Moabites, where the Torah instead ignores that tradition and focuses just on the prophetic tradition of Balaam. I would not hearken, etc. God speaks through Joshua. The men of Jericho, the inhabitants of Jericho, or the lords of Jericho. All the Canaanitish kings owned parts of Jericho. The Amorites, all 7 nations are mentioned here, since Jericho is situated on the border and is the fortification of Eretz Yisrael, and the heroic soldiers of all 7 nations assembled therein. This battle was not mentioned previously. The hornet, the word sir'ah, a flying insect resembling the bee in the structure of its body and its way of life. It does not produce honey, however. Its stings are very painful and are sometimes fatal. Scripture refers to swarms of hornets. Said Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, the hornets stood on the banks of the Jordan and sprayed venom, which blinded their eyes from above and castrated them from below. So this is the midrash about how this plague of the hornets worked. Rav Papa maintains that there were 2 types of hornets, one at the time of Moses and one at the time of Joshua. The one at the time of Moses did not cross the Jordan, whereas the one at Joshua's time did cross the Jordan. Others interpret sir'ah as akin to tzara'at, leprosy. Abarvanel explains that the dread of the Israelites who had miraculously vanquished Sichon and Og is compared to a hornet or wasp. Okay, so just different comments and midrashim about what the nature of this hornet plague is.
I like the answer that's in the older version.
Yeah.
It says it was a shield. The hornet was a shibboleth. It's a badge that had the form of a hornet on King, pardon my pronunciation, Tatzmais the Third.
Yeah, but I see where you're reading. Right. On the other hand, Garstang has objected the hornets could not account for the rout of a whole army, He
Right.
therefore suggested the allusion is to the repeated invasions by King Thutmose III and his successors, whose badge had the form of a hornet. And these attacks had reduced the strength of the Canaanites so that they succumbed to the Israelite campaign. As a theory, this is ingenious but far-fetched.
I like it.
Okay, whatever. It's all theory about what this hornet, what this reference to hornets is. We'll see what Alter says about it soon. The two kings, Joshua is referring back to verse 8 to stress his point that the victories of the Israelites had not been due to their military prowess. What had been true of Sichon and Og was applied to the peoples enumerated in verse 11. 13, the verse describes the fulfillment of the promise recalled by Moses in Deuteronomy 6. Now, therefore, since God has bestowed upon you all these favors, and in Egypt, and they shall no more sacrifice their sacrifices unto the satyrs, after whom they go astray, which implies that they were continuing to do so. Ezekiel 20 records, neither did they forsake the idols of Egypt. According to rabbinic tradition, the Israelites in Egypt were steeped in idolatry. Choose you, and there could be no compromise, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, like Exodus 20, as Joshua immediately reminds them, who demands undivided allegiance. Similarly, Elijah issued the challenge, how long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him, but if Baal, follow him. From 1 Kings. They could not serve both. This simple truth took the Israelites hundreds of years to learn. But as for, and I would argue, we're still having a hard time to learn this, right? 100% of the Jewish community is not fully observant or believing in God. A lot of atheists in the community, a lot of different opinions out there in the Jewish community. So we're still lacking unity in that particular issue. But as for me and my house, a spirited note of defiance rings through the words. Were all to prove unfaithful, he would not fear to be in a minority of one. In the same spirit, Mattathias declared many centuries later, appropriate for Hanukkah, Matityahu, though all the nations that are under the king's dominion obey him and fall away, every one from the religion of their fathers, yet will I and my sons and my brethren walk in the covenant of our fathers. From 1 Maccabees. Okay. 19 on page 148, perhaps Joshua recalled the fervent reply in the past, all the words which the Lord has spoken we will do, from Exodus 24, and how quickly it was forgotten. So he warns the people that the service of God is very exacting, and a mere facile declaration was not enough. To serve him meant single-minded devotion and dedication to his will. Ye cannot serve the Lord in a half-hearted way. He is a holy God who abhors everything that is impure, demanding holiness of living from his worshipers. He is a jealous God who brooks no compromise between good and evil. He will not forgive your sins. He is not a God who can be bribed to forgive by means of rich sacrifices. And consume you after that he has done you good. Each generation has its own responsibility. It cannot rely on the virtues of former generations if it is itself unworthy. Ye are witnesses against yourselves, therefore you admit that divine punishment will be justified if you incur it. See Rashi. I'm hoping we have time to finish. 149, that you have chosen you the Lord of your free will, as all religious practice must be. Put away the strange gods. Joshua's stern challenge and reiterated demand for wholehearted allegiance to God were evidently not without cause. He knew that some harbored heretic beliefs to which he referred as strange gods. Joshua made a covenant with the people that day on the strength of their unequivocal declaration. He renewed the covenant which God had first made with Israel at Sinai. In the book of the law of God, this cannot mean that Joshua added this as an appendix to the Pentateuch and included it therein. Firstly, because the book of Moses were too sacred to be tampered with, and secondly, because the words are not to be found there. It may indicate that he wrote them on a scroll, which he deposited in the same place together with the book of the law of God, namely the Torah. It is, however, hard to read this meaning into the text. The difficulty appears if we render with the book of the law of God. The intention would be then that he wrote his book, including all the events recorded therein, as well as the covenant, as the book following the book of the law of God, that is, following the Pentateuch. The rabbis explain the phrase as applying to the last 8 verses of the Pentateuch, from "So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there" to the end, or the chapter on the cities of refuge. So in other words, there's a question now, how literally do we take what Joshua just said to apply to the Torah itself? There are some say that the last sentences of the Torah were written by Joshua, and maybe that's what he's referring to here, or makes more sense to me that he's just writing out of the book to be stored with the Torah. He took a great stone. It was a common practice to set up a stone to commemorate an event of importance. Joshua commemorated the crossing of the Jordan in this manner. If we remember back in chapter 1, the stones that were set up in the Jordan River. The oak that was by the sanctuary, the Hebrew is literally in the sanctuary. This was not a permanent sanctuary, but it was called the sanctuary of the Lord because they brought the ark there, as it's stated above. And they presented themselves before God, as mentioned above in the name of the Da'at Sophrim. This was a temporary sanctuary. It was one of the high places heretofore used for sacrifices and still used for prayer even after the erection of the tabernacle in Shiloh. In either case, it was not necessarily a building, but a hallowed site, and an oak tree could easily be found within its confines. According to the Midrash, this was the oak tree under which Jacob hid the idols and their ornaments that were part of the booty of Shechem. Others render under the doorpost which is in the sanctuary of the Lord, that is, under the doorpost of the temporary sanctuary in Shechem. Others conjecture that it was placed under the doorpost in the sanctuary in Shiloh. The servant of the Lord, a faithful disciple of Moses, he was now crowned with the same title as his master. He had begun his task with a solemn reminder that he was continuing the work of the servant of the Lord. He ends it with the proud consciousness that he too had earned that praise. Timnat Serach, see on chapter 19, verse 50. 1950 is 1950. Right, so that's the city that was given to Joshua as an inheritance. Okay, but it doesn't tell us, still doesn't help where it is. Now the last page, 151. The bones of Joseph in accordance with his dying request from Genesis, which the children of Israel brought up out of Egypt. In fact, it was Moses who did this. The rabbis point out that when a person leaves his task unfinished, as did Moses, who brought the bones out of Egypt but could not bury them in the land of Israel, Scripture regards those who complete it as having performed it. Buried they, perhaps better they had probably buried him soon after their arrival in Canaan, but the historian records the incident here in fitting connection with Joshua's death. In Shechem, the Talmud remarks, from Shechem he was abducted, to Shechem he was returned. Right, so that's what we read in the Torah portion this week about the sale of Joseph into slavery. That was at Shechem, which God brought. See Genesis 33. They became, namely, the city of Shechem and the parcel of ground, the hill of Pinchas, in the city of Gibeah, a name which occurs frequently, signifying that it stood on or near a hill, which had been given to him and called by his name. It's conjectured to be the modern Gibeah, northwest of Gufna, or Et Tel, south of Senjil. The death of Pinchas marked the close of an era. The people were settled in their land. Thus, I think it means the death of Eleazar, not the death of Pinchas. The people were settled in their land. Thus, the first stage in God's design, first revealed to Abraham in the words, "And I will make of thee a great nation," was fulfilled. But it was as yet far from completion. A long period of spiritual development was to follow. Okay, so that ends that, and let's look at ancient Israel. There's just a little bit of commentary here below the lines. I think We might finish by 10:30, if not a minute or two after. We're on page 98 in ancient Israel, and Joshua gathered all the tribes. The book appropriately ends with a renewal of the covenant between Israel and its God, followed by the obituary notices for Joshua and Eleazar. Your forefathers dwelled across the Euphrates, and they served other gods. Joshua's recapitulation of national history begins all the way back with Abraham's ancestral family in Mesopotamia. Euphrates in the Hebrew, as elsewhere in biblical usage, is the river. But he immediately reminds his audience that before Abraham, these people were idolaters, for the danger of backsliding into idolatry is uppermost in his mind throughout the speech. Jacob and Esau, it's noteworthy that Esau, together with his territorial inheritance, is mentioned with Jacob. There may be a gesture of restitution here for Jacob stealing the paternal blessing. I struck Egypt with plagues that I wrought in its midst. The Hebrew text shows that what looks like a small glitch. I struck Egypt with plagues as, or when, I wrought in its midst. The Septuagint, the Greek translation, has a smoother reading. I struck Egypt with plagues as I wrought signs in its midst. A veil of darkness, the Hebrew ma'afel, cognate to the more common afelah, darkness, is unique to this verse. The clear reference is to the pillar of cloud in Exodus. The land of the Amorites dwelling across the Jordan, these are the Transjordanian kings vanquished by Israel under Moses, as reported in Numbers and in Deuteronomy. Balak did battle against Israel because no actual battle is reported in Numbers 22. Some commentators have claimed that a variant tradition is reflected here, but this is an unnecessary inference. Balak clearly saw Israel as his enemy and sought to destroy it using the curses of a professional hexer as his weapon of choice. The Amorite, the Perizzite, the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Girgashite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite. It's odd that all the 7 peoples of Canaan are introduced here as though they had fought at Jericho, whereas no mention of a Canaanite alliance appears in the Jericho story. Perhaps Jericho, as the gateway town of Canaan and the first conquered, triggered the invocation of all these peoples in a kind of synecdoche, however you pronounce that. Okay, the hornet. This is the traditional understanding of Sir'ah, leading some scholars to claim that noxious insects were actually used as weapons. But on etymological grounds, as I proposed in comments on Exodus 23 and Deuteronomy 7, the term could mean the smasher, a mythological rather than a zoological entity. You are eating the fruit. Fruit is implied by ellipsis. Pointedly, the verb for enjoying the fruit of vineyard and olive grove switches from past to present participle, emphasizing to the audience that they themselves are benefiting from the conquest. In wholeness and truth, right? Tamim, wholeness. Many construe these two Hebrew nouns as a hendiadys, having the sense of in absolute truth. Love these terms that Alter just throws out there, assuming we know what they mean. Whether the gods that your forefathers served or the gods of the Amorites, there is surely a note of sarcasm here. If you really want to serve foreign gods, just take your pick between Mesopotamian and Canaanite deities. All the peoples, the Amorites. Amorites is sometimes a particular people and sometimes a general rubric for the sundry peoples of Canaan. We will not be able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. In the face of the people's solemn declaration to remain faithful to the God of Israel, Joshua expresses grave doubt. Yahweh is a holy God, making severe demands of exclusive loyalty, and I don't believe you will be able to meet these demands. This view sets the stage for the series of idolatrous backslidings in Judges. Set it for them as statute and law, the same phrase is used in Exodus 15. The book of God's teaching. This is a new designation on the model of the book of Moses' teaching, and so can refer either to Deuteronomy or to the 5 books of Moses, unless what Joshua writes is an appendix to them. This stone shall be witness. Commemorative stone markers confirming treaties appear a number of times in the Hebrew Bible and were common in much of the ancient Near East. Servant of the Lord, here at the end of Joshua is given the same epithet as Moses. Here at the end, Joshua is given the same epithet as Moses. 110 years old, the narrative pointedly allots Joshua 10 years fewer than Moses, using instead the Egyptian number for a very full lifespan, which is Joseph's number. He died at 110. The received text of Joshua ends on a relatively harmonious note of renewal of the covenant and the death in ripe old age of the military leader Joshua and the priestly leader Eleazar. But the ancient Greek translator used a Hebrew text that concludes more discordantly with the following verse, which confirms Joshua's doubts and looks forward to Judges. And the Israelites went each man to his place and to the town, and the Israelites served Ashtoreth and the Ashtaroth and the gods of the peoples round about them, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Eglon, king of Moab, and he ruled over them 18 years. Well, we'll have to see the beginning of the book of Judges to see that connection and why, how that works with Judges, okay? Though a variant manuscript might have added this report in order to create a bridge with the beginning of Judges, it seems more likely that a scribe or an editor deleted it out of motives of national piety so as not to conclude the book with an image of Israel's shame. Okay, so we're ending there on Alter's note about different manuscripts about the book of Joshua, and leading us to our discussion of Judges, which we'll continue with next Friday. So have a good rest of the day, everybody. Happy Hanukkah and Shabbat Shalom.